I have been toying with the basic idea of La Fiamma for almost 10 years. On the surface, it is a folk horror short about a remote mountain community attacked by a monster known as the Withered. The adults are missing and a young elk, who is terminally ill, rises up to the challenge and saves the village. In reality, the attack by the monster is a charade organized by his sister Nairi in order to give Elk the opportunity of dying a hero instead of just being slowly consumed by the disease. It is a story about childlike innocence, shared memory, and the primacy of imagination over reality.
When I first read the script, I noticed how ambitious the project was production-wise. The unknown language, freezing remote locations, and challenging effects were making this short movie very, very difficult to get done. But I've been knowing Giacomo for many years, and I think that if there is something that makes us much alike, it is the will to take on big challenges. I lead my company to take the same approach, and this is why The Best Plan could not do anything else than offer its support to the project. We worked briefly together to polish the script, and while the shooting days were approaching, I was sure that we would have made something great, overcome all difficulties, and most of all, we would get in return a big deal of working experience.
The story was originally set in a completely fictional world, which, in my mind, was a medley of several different cultures, the common denominator being communities that lived in cold areas of the world, Sami, Algonquian, Yupik, and so on. Just enough confusion so that the spectator has no idea where exactly the film is set and which language the characters speak. Making up a language with decent results, however, requires deep knowledge and a lot of perseverance. And, well, perseverance was all I had. Then one day it occurred to us that we already had a ready-made solution to our problem. The Asiago Plateau, a mountain range very close to our home, is the cradle of a fascinating Germanic minority, the Cimbrians, and their language is a very specific blend of Italian and Middle-aged Bavarian. The Cimbrian community offered the cultural depth required for making the world believable and an essentially unknown language that could provide the disorienting effect I was looking for. Thanks to Andrea Nicolussi from the Kulturinstitut Luzern, we were able to translate the script in Cimbrian and also to record audio demos of the correct pronunciation so that the young actors, especially Jacopo and Martina, could practice before going into filming. Still, it was a formidable challenge that the entire cast faced with great courage and enthusiasm. There are two opposing interpretations of the Cimbrian origin. The legendary one traces them back to the barbarians defeated by the Romans in the 2nd century BC. The historical one identifies them as the descendants of medieval Germanic settlers who fled modern-day Bavaria after a series of very harsh winters and eventually settled in the Asiago Plateau. We hope La Fiamma is just our first step into the fascinating world of the Cimbrians. We are in fact working on long-form scripts and stories that will take us back to the times where these pagan communities first came into contact with Christianity, taking inspiration from the legendary origins of these people. I believe there is much to be learned about our past, but also meaningful teachings about the world we live in today and the way we all live in it. The film was mainly shot inside the beautiful Spangler House, a historical rural building in Cima Sappada, while the exterior shots were filmed in a wide range of locations, mostly coherent with the original Cimbrian settling area, such as the Asiago and Consiglio plateaus. The original photography was done in January and it was extremely cold, even inside the Spangler House. The only source of heating was the flame itself, a creation of our DP, Mattia Gri, but all it could do was to raise the temperature a few degrees Celsius. However, the harsh shooting conditions probably gave the performances that extra touch of credibility.
Much harder for me was to coordinate a large group of extras during the night shoots in a location called Val Visdende, a snow-covered valley with only moonlight and torch lighting the way. I had my technical clothing on and I was freezing like crazy, but I had to be very careful not to complain because the extras were wearing scene costumes that sometimes didn't cover much. I was honestly scared for them, but they were telling me not to worry, they are proud mountain people, they can take it. I wish I had their superpower. I guess it is the most cold I've ever felt in my life. And because of this, it was a very clean, efficient, and most importantly, quick shoot. It's all about motivation. In this case, the shooting conditions were not the easiest, and even the adult crew were struggling at times, so we had extra care for our young cast. I remember how they were so excited and involved in the storytelling, rehearsing together their lines in such a difficult language. We did our best to make their stay on set the most comfortable, but I must really say that they have been true professionals, always focused and cooperating creatively and technically with us.
La direzione del doppiaggio della Fiamma è stato molto particolare. Io sono un doppiatore da 15 anni, faccio questo mestiere da tanto tempo e mi è capitato di dirigere doppiaggi, ma mai di dirigere doppiaggi in cimbro, cioè in una lingua che non esiste più. Quindi qual è stata fondamentalmente la sfida, la difficoltà di questa lavorazione? I ragazzi non sono doppiatori, sono degli attori bravissimi, ma non sono doppiatori. Quindi hanno dovuto adattare le proprie capacità recitative alla tecnica del doppiaggio, al microfono, alla sala, al leggio, al sync. Sono dovuti andare a sync con loro stessi. Il fatto che fosse però in cimbro e non in italiano ha fatto sì che, in quanto direttore, avevo chi mi aveva preparato oltre ai testi anche le traduzioni, perché grazie alle traduzioni io riuscivo a capire l'intenzione che aveva quella battuta, il perché, il significato, cosa c'era dietro alla motivazione per cui una battuta veniva detta e ovviamente il senso delle parole. Devo dire che i ragazzi sono stati bravissimi, sono riusciti veramente bene a ricreare, a ritrovare quelle sensazioni che hanno avuto sul set per poter appunto interpretare i loro personaggi.
Conosciamo Hive Division dai tempi di Metal Gear Philanthropy. Vedere una realtà italiana capace di trasformare le proprie passioni in opere tanto curate è una fonte di ispirazione sia come Watari Studio che come autori singoli. Nel tempo abbiamo sempre tenuto d'occhio il lavoro di Hive e l'occasione di collaborare si è presentata quando Hive ha cominciato a sviluppare la Fiamma e come Watari Studio ci siamo occupati di sviluppare la concept art per il cortometraggio.
Abbiamo anche avuto modo di confrontarci con la costumista Nadia Baiardi, in modo da capire in che direzione lavorare sui concept. La particolarità che ci entusiasmava riguardava soprattutto il mood da rappresentare, una sorta di ambientazione che incrociava i luoghi meravigliosi delle Alpi con i racconti oscuri delle fiabe popolari e dei miti antichi.
La figura dell'avvizzito ci ha affascinato fin da subito nel suo design. Richiama alla perfezione il luogo in cui è ambientato e soprattutto la sua funzione narrativa. Raccontare la sua storia, la sua genesi, sarebbe stato un ottimo modo per indagare anche il passato di quel popolo, senza però dimenticare la forza che la fiaba ha sul piccolo ascoltatore che è in ognuno di noi.
The Withered is just another name for the quintessential boogeyman that can be found in most European traditions. He's meant as a cautionary tale for children, a way to teach them that their house and family will not be able to shield them indefinitely from the world, that they need to fear what's outside. On a deeper level, it represents Eric's growing despair, the illness that we now know as pellagra took away his mother and is now conquering his body. The Withered projects this enemy outside of him and provides him with an opponent, a powerful opponent but one he thinks he has a fighting chance against. The costume of the Withered was a collaboration with famed special makeup designer Leonardo Cruciano. He had the difficult task of creating something that looked menacing when seen from afar, but that would be later revealed as a cheap makeshift costume made with whatever those poor mountain men could put their hands on. It was a very tough balance to strike, and I believe he did a wonderful job. Our VFX team added its own specific touch, and through the eyes of a feverish Eric, we see some supernatural traits of the Withered. These visual elements hint at the backstory we developed for the Withered, a tale that we had the chance to see brought to life, thanks to the effort of our friends at Watari Studio.
Dopo la realizzazione dei concept per il corto live action, sentivamo che l'ambientazione della fiamma aveva altro da dire. Abbiamo pensato a cosa potesse aver intaccato il legno delle case, alle storie di coloro che ci hanno vissuto e alle credenze popolari, al mito che sta alla base di esse.
Occupandomi della parte narrativa del racconto, il mio obiettivo iniziale era di espandere il world building messo in piedi da Giacomo. Dopo una prima stesura del soggetto, abbiamo quindi lavorato insieme per fare in modo che tutto fosse coerente con il progetto La Fiamma. Era necessario che lo storytelling scorresse fluido, ma che allo stesso tempo il video non apparisse come uno slideshow di disegni.
Una volta stabilita la trama e suddiviso le scene, abbiamo iniziato a pensare ai personaggi e ai luoghi e a come avremmo potuto raccontarli. Data l'ambientazione del cortometraggio live action, sapevamo che i paesaggi avrebbero avuto una grossa importanza e volevamo inoltre creare un distacco temporale con gli avvenimenti della fiamma, usando una palette di colori ben distinta che evidenziasse la traiettoria emotiva del nostro corto. Per la realizzazione delle illustrazioni da animare, il processo è stato più complesso rispetto a una normale illustrazione o concept.
La necessità di dover animare molteplici oggetti all'interno del quadro ha fatto sì che le illustrazioni fossero concepite in più piani e livelli, a volte anche parecchi per descrivere un singolo personaggio. Il tipo di animazione, il motion comic, realizzato da Mattia Dalzotto, è stato scelto per mantenere l'attenzione sul racconto narrato da Maurizio Merluzzi. Anche la parte sonora ha avuto un ruolo molto importante. I suoni e le musiche, composte da Francesco Russo, hanno avuto il compito di sopperire alla mancanza di una vera e propria recitazione, mirando ad amplificare la drammaticità delle scene e facendo vagare l'immaginazione dello spettatore.
Alk's illness is not just withering his body, it is withering his will to live, to imagine and to play. He is led to believe that the sacred flame of the village is in danger, but it is really his own spiritual flame that is at risk of being smothered. It is a struggle we all face. To some extent, as we become adults, we gradually replace our innocence and our creativity with cynicism and cunning. We wither, we compromise, and we bend our original nature, trying to adapt to a competitive environment until there is very little left of our inner child. We actually resent him because he makes us look weak. We resent him because he reminds us that we were once able to experience pure happiness, the like of which we probably won't ever taste again. And yet he reminds us to take risks, to be vulnerable with others, and he eventually gives us a chance to be understanding parents to our kids. The inner child is a flame worth protecting, both in ourselves and in the people we love. But the choice to do so can only derive from the awareness of an adult person, or at least a mature one. In our story, that choice belongs to Nairi, who is wise much beyond her age and just as hardened by life as Alk. She has made peace with the idea of losing her brother, and we see her mourning alone in the very opening of the film. But she cannot stand the idea of seeing him go without the guiding light of his flame, and she decides to act accordingly. Death used to be an ever-present occurrence in ancient civilizations. Life expectancy was much lower, and it was relatively common for a family to lose a child. Communities used to absorb this trauma collectively, assigning it a codified meaning and then moving on. Season after season, the exact information about how long Alk lived or how exactly he died was bound to be forgotten and traded for something much more valuable, the collective memory of him, passed on from one generation to the next. In a pre-literary civilization, what survived of an individual was oftentimes just a story, constantly re-elaborated from its original seed in the way that best fitted the fears and the hopes of the community as a whole. Nairi understood this. She convinced the villagers to give Alk a proper send-off, and by doing so, she provided the specific closure each of them needed. The healer entrusted Frau Perta with the purest possible soul, untarnished by the fear of death. Alk's severe father was able to receive the loving words his son never dared to speak in his presence. Menok and Trestar bore witness to his desperate display of courage. Years will go by and the tale will be told of Alk, who stood alone defending the flame. The fact that the threat was fictional will not matter, and it never mattered. It was just a story, but deep down, stories are all we really are. Data and notions are fleeting, meaning is what takes root.